The word lingered in the air long after it had been spoken. Dad. It did not echo. It did not need to. It settled into the walls of the house, into the marble floors and high ceilings that had once held only silence where truth should have lived. Elijah stood still for a moment longer than anyone expected, as if he feared that moving might break something fragile that had only just begun to form. Jalon shifted his weight slightly, his small hand brushing against Jordan's sleeve. There was no uncertainty in his eyes now, only a quiet patience, as though he understood that some moments required time to become real. Elijah finally stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not reach out immediately. Instead, he lowered himself slightly so that he stood at their level, his gaze steady, his expression open in a way it had never been allowed to be before. "I heard you," he said quietly. Jordan smiled again, softer this time, as if the word had already become natural to him. Jalon nodded once, his usual seriousness returning, but without the guarded distance that had once defined him. Vanessa watched from where she stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had faced a room full of powerful people without trembling, had dismantled years of deception in a single evening, but this moment unsettled her in a way she could not control. Because this was not about truth spoken aloud. This was about truth being lived. Elijah reached out then, placing a hand gently on each of their shoulders. The gesture was simple, but it carried years of absence within it. The boys did not pull away. They did not hesitate. They leaned in. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief second. It was not relief she felt. Not entirely. Relief was too light a word for something that had cost so much. What she felt was heavier, steadier, like something rebuilding itself from the inside out. "Mama Agnes was right," Jordan said suddenly, glancing back toward Vanessa. "She said things feel different when they're real." Vanessa opened her eyes and met his gaze. For once, she did not try to shape her response into something controlled or perfect. "She was right," she said. The afternoon passed quietly after that. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic conversations. The house, which had once been filled with constant movement and unspoken tension, seemed to slow into something unfamiliar. Stillness. Not the heavy stillness of avoidance, but something softer. Something that allowed space. Elijah remained near the entrance for a while, as though he had not yet decided how far he was allowed to go. Old habits did not disappear in a single moment, no matter how powerful that moment had been. Vanessa noticed. She approached him later, her steps measured but unguarded. "You don't have to stay there," she said. Elijah looked at her, not with resentment, but with a kind of quiet caution that had been shaped over years. "I know," he replied. But he did not move. Vanessa understood then that permission was not enough. Words alone could not undo what had been built through silence and distance. So she did something small. She turned and walked further into the house, pausing only once to glance back. "Come inside," she said, not as an order, not as a request, but as something in between. Elijah hesitated for only a moment this time. Then he followed. The boys moved ahead of them, their voices low as they spoke to each other, already adjusting to a reality that adults often took far longer to accept. They did not question where Elijah walked. They did not measure the distance between him and the rest of the house. To them, the path was simple. Vanessa watched as Elijah stepped fully into the space he had once been denied. It was a quiet entry, without ceremony, without acknowledgement from anyone but her. And yet, it felt larger than anything that had happened the night before. In the days that followed, the outside world did not remain silent. The gala had not gone unnoticed. News moved quickly, faster than Vanessa had anticipated, carried through networks of influence and curiosity. Statements were requested. Explanations were demanded. The name that had once represented stability now carried questions. Conrad handled most of it. He moved with precision, releasing only what was necessary, allowing the truth to stand without embellishment. The documents spoke clearly enough on their own. Bianca and Victor, once untouchable within the family's inner circle, found themselves isolated. Invitations were withdrawn. Conversations shifted. The same society that had once supported them now turned away with quiet efficiency. Vanessa did not involve herself in their downfall. She had no interest in watching it unfold. Her focus remained within the walls of the house, where the real consequences of her choices existed. Rebuilding, she realized, was not a single act. It was a series of small, deliberate moments. Breakfast became one of those moments. The first time they sat together at the same table, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was not filled with things unsaid, but with things waiting to be learned. Jordan spoke first, as he often did. "Do you like tea or coffee?" he asked Elijah, as if this were the most important question in the world. Elijah blinked slightly, caught off guard. "Tea," he answered. Jalon nodded thoughtfully, as though committing the information to memory. Vanessa watched the exchange, something unfamiliar settling in her chest. This was how it began. Not with apologies repeated endlessly, not with attempts to rewrite the past, but with questions that moved forward. Elijah did not try to claim space that was not yet his. He listened more than he spoke. He answered when asked, and when he spoke, it was with a calm steadiness that seemed to anchor the room. The boys responded to it naturally. They brought him into their routines without hesitation, showing him small things that mattered to them. A book they were reading, a game they had learned, stories from school that held meaning in ways adults often overlooked. Vanessa remained present, but she did not lead these moments. For once, she allowed something to grow without controlling its shape. Mama Agnes observed everything. She said little, but her presence carried a quiet approval that Vanessa felt even when no words were spoken. There were moments when their eyes met across the room, and in those moments, Vanessa understood that this was what had been missing all along. Not power, not order, but truth allowed to exist without resistance. One evening, as the sun settled into a muted gold beyond the windows, Vanessa found Elijah standing alone in the study. It was a room that had once belonged entirely to her. He stood near the shelves, his hand resting lightly against the spine of a book, not taking it down, not intruding further than he believed he should. "You can read it," Vanessa said from the doorway. Elijah turned slightly. "I wasn't sure if I should," he admitted. Vanessa stepped inside. "There are many things we weren't sure about," she said. "That doesn't mean we leave them untouched forever." Elijah studied her for a moment, as if weighing the meaning behind her words. "This room was yours," he said. "It still is," Vanessa replied. Then, after a pause, she added, "But that doesn't mean it cannot be shared." The distinction was small, but it mattered. Elijah nodded once, then finally took the book from the shelf. Vanessa did not stay. She understood that some spaces needed to be entered slowly, without observation. As she walked away, she realized that letting go of control did not mean losing something. It meant allowing something else to exist alongside it. Later that night, the house settled into its new rhythm. The boys slept without interruption, their sense of security no longer divided by unspoken absence. Mama Agnes retired early, her quiet presence leaving behind a calm that lingered. Vanessa remained awake. She stood by the window in her room, looking out over the grounds that had once felt like a fortress. Now they felt different, not smaller, but less isolating. There was a knock at the door. She turned, her expression unreadable for a brief moment before she spoke. "Come in." Elijah entered, not with hesitation, but with a measured respect that had not yet faded. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. Vanessa nodded slightly. So did I. For a moment, neither of them continued. The space between them held years of silence, of choices made and unmade, of words that had never been spoken when they should have been. Elijah broke it first. "I don't expect things to be simple," he said. Vanessa met his gaze. "They won't be," she agreed. There was no comfort in the truth, but there was clarity. Elijah continued, his voice steady. "But I want to be here. Not just for them. For all of it." Vanessa studied him carefully. There was no accusation in his words. No demand. Only a quiet certainty that felt stronger than anything raised in anger. "You should have always been here," she said. Elijah did not respond immediately. When he did, his words were softer. Maybe, he said. But we are here now. Vanessa exhaled slowly. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something that could lead there. Outside, the night deepened, settling over the house in a way that no longer felt heavy. Inside, something continued to shift. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough to be felt. And as the quiet stretched between them, no longer filled with avoidance but with the possibility of something rebuilt, neither of them moved to end the moment. The moment did not break. It shifted slowly, as if both of them understood that whatever came next had to be built with care. Vanessa moved first, not away, but closer to the small table near the window. She rested her hand lightly against its surface, grounding herself in something steady. Elijah remained where he was, but the distance between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like space that could be crossed without resistance. "There are things we need to decide," Vanessa said at last. Elijah nodded. There always were. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something that carried acknowledgement. "Yes," she said. "But before, I decided them alone." The admission settled between them with quiet weight. Elijah did not rush to respond. He had learned the cost of speaking too quickly into fragile spaces. Vanessa continued, her voice even. "The boys, their lives will change. Not just here but outside this house. People will ask questions. They will be watched." Elijah's expression tightened slightly, not in fear, but in focus. "I won't let that harm them." "I know," Vanessa replied. "But protection is not only about shielding. It is also about preparing." Elijah considered that. "They should know enough to stand on their own," he said. Vanessa met his gaze. "And not so much that they carry what belongs to us." For a moment, they stood in agreement without conflict. It was unfamiliar, but it did not feel forced. "We'll tell them what matters," Elijah said. "The truth, but not the weight behind it." Vanessa inclined her head slightly. "Yes." Another pause followed, but it was no longer empty. It held direction. "Elijah," Vanessa said, more quietly now, "there are legal matters as well. Conrad has begun the process. Your position, their standing, everything will need to be formalized." Elijah did not look surprised. "I expected that. You will have a choice," she continued. "Not just in name but in role. This house, this family, it will not remain as it was." Elijah's gaze moved briefly toward the window, where the darkness outside reflected faintly against the glass. "It shouldn't," he said. Vanessa studied him. "What do you want it to become?" He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried a quiet certainty. "Something honest," he said. "Even if it's less impressive." Vanessa let out a slow breath. "That may be the most difficult transformation of all." Elijah's expression softened slightly. "Difficult doesn't mean impossible." Their conversation did not reach a conclusion that night. It did not need to. What mattered was that it had begun without defensiveness, without avoidance. When Elijah left the room, Vanessa remained where she was, her thoughts no longer circling the past in the same way. They moved forward now, uncertain, but not directionless. The next morning arrived with a subtle shift in rhythm. The house no longer felt like it was waiting. It moved. Staff members adjusted quickly, their professionalism allowing them to adapt without question. But there was a noticeable difference in how they carried themselves. The tension that had once defined their silence had eased, replaced by something more open, even if it remained restrained. Vanessa noticed everything. She always had. But this time, she chose not to control every adjustment. Instead, she observed. Breakfast unfolded with a quiet sense of routine beginning to form. Jalin and Jordan entered together, speaking in low voices that paused only when they noticed Elijah already seated at the table. There was no hesitation this time. "Good morning," Jordan said. Elijah looked up. "Good morning." Jalin took his seat, his posture straight, but his eyes attentive. "We have a presentation today," he said. "At school." Elijah nodded. "What is it about?" "Family history," Jordan answered before Jalin could. "We were supposed to present last week, but we asked for more time. Elijah's expression shifted slightly, something thoughtful passing through it. And now, Jalon met his gaze directly. Now we know what to say. The words were simple, but they carried more than information. Vanessa felt it immediately. "What will you say?" she asked, her tone calm, though her attention sharpened. Jordan glanced at Jalon, then back at Elijah. "The truth," he said. Vanessa held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Then say it clearly." There was no correction, no redirection. Just acceptance. Elijah watched her, understanding the weight of what she had just allowed. After breakfast, the boys prepared to leave. The car waited outside as it always had, but today felt different. Elijah walked with them to the entrance. "Will you be here when we get back?" Jordan asked. Elijah did not hesitate. "Yes." Jalon nodded once, as if confirming something internally. "Good." They left without looking back. Vanessa stood beside Elijah for a moment after the car disappeared from view. "They trust you," she said. Elijah's gaze remained forward. "They're learning too," he replied. Vanessa considered that. "So are we." The hours that followed brought movement beyond the house. Conrad arrived late in the morning, his presence as composed as ever, though there was a trace of urgency beneath it. "There are developments," he said as Vanessa and Elijah joined him in the sitting room. Vanessa gestured for him to continue. "Bianca has attempted to contest the documents," Conrad explained. "It was expected. However, the evidence is too comprehensive. The board is already distancing itself." "And Victor?" Elijah asked. Conrad's expression remained neutral, less composed. "He is attempting to negotiate privately, but there is little leverage left." Vanessa listened without visible reaction. "And the family name?" she asked. Conrad met her gaze. "It will endure," he said, "but its meaning will shift. That depends on what you choose to build now." Vanessa glanced briefly at Elijah before returning her attention to Conrad. "Then we build carefully." Conrad inclined his head. "I will handle the external matters," he said. "But internally, the direction must come from you." Vanessa stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "It will," she said. As Conrad left, the room fell quiet again. Elijah remained seated, his posture relaxed but attentive. "You're not concerned about them?" he asked. Vanessa turned slightly. "Bianca and Victor?" Elijah nodded. Vanessa's expression did not change. "They made their choices," she said. "I am no longer responsible for the consequences." There was no bitterness in her voice, only finality. Elijah accepted that. That afternoon, the house felt unusually still. Vanessa found herself in the garden, a place she had rarely visited without purpose. The air carried a quiet warmth, the kind that settled without demanding attention. She walked slowly, her thoughts moving alongside her. Rebuilding. The word returned again and again, not as a burden, but as a process she was beginning to understand. Footsteps approached from behind. She did not turn immediately. "Elijah," she said. He stopped beside her. "You've been out here for a while." Vanessa nodded slightly. "I forgot this place existed," she admitted. Elijah glanced around. "It's peaceful." Vanessa looked at him then. "I didn't allow much peace before." Elijah considered her words. "No," he said. "You didn't." There was no accusation in it, just truth. Vanessa exhaled slowly. "I thought control was the same as stability." Elijah's gaze softened slightly. "It often feels that way." Vanessa's lips curved faintly. "And now?" Elijah looked out across the garden. "Now it feels different," he said. "Less certain, but more real." Vanessa nodded. "Yes." They stood there for a while, not speaking, but not avoiding the silence either. When the boys returned later that day, there was a quiet energy about them. They entered the house quickly, their steps more animated than usual. "How did it go?" Elijah asked. Jordan answered immediately. "We told them everything." Jalon added, "Not everything." just what mattered. Elijah crouched slightly, bringing himself level with them. And how was it received? Jordan shrugged lightly. Some people didn't understand. Jalen's expression remained steady. But it didn't matter. Vanessa stepped closer. Why not? Jalen looked at her. Because it was true. Vanessa held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. That's enough, she said. Jordan smiled. And we didn't feel nervous. Elijah's expression warmed slightly. That's because you knew what you were saying. Jalen glanced between them. It felt normal. The word lingered. Normal. Vanessa absorbed it quietly. For the first time, it did not feel out of reach. That evening, as the house settled once more, the sense of change continued to unfold in small, steady ways. Nothing dramatic. Nothing forced. Just a gradual alignment of things that had long been out of place. Vanessa stood once again near the window, but this time she was not alone. Elijah joined her without announcement. The boys are asleep, he said. Vanessa nodded. They seemed lighter. Elijah allowed a faint smile. They are. Vanessa looked out into the darkness beyond the glass. We have a long way to go, she said. Elijah did not disagree. Yes, he replied. Vanessa turned slightly, her expression calm but resolute. But we're no longer standing still. Elijah met her gaze. No, he said. We're not. And as the quiet settled around them, it no longer carried the weight of what had been hidden. Morning came without urgency, as though the house itself had learned not to rush into the day. Light filtered through the tall windows in soft layers, settling across the floors and walls with a quiet patience. Vanessa was already awake, seated at the long table in the smaller dining room rather than the formal one. It was a subtle change, but deliberate. The larger room had always carried a sense of performance. This one allowed something more natural. She had not called anyone. She waited. Not out of expectation, but out of willingness. The sound of footsteps came gradually, not all at once. Jordan appeared first, his expression still carrying traces of sleep, though his eyes brightened when he saw her. You're here early, he said. Vanessa allowed a faint, genuine softness into her voice. So are you. He smiled, then took a seat without hesitation, as if this arrangement had always existed. A moment later, Jalen entered, more composed, more aware of his surroundings. His gaze moved between Vanessa and Jordan before he chose his place at the table. Elijah arrived last. He paused briefly at the doorway, observing the quiet scene before stepping inside. It was a small pause, but Vanessa noticed it. She noticed everything. This time, however, she did not interpret it as distance. She recognized it for what it was. Adjustment. Good morning, he said. The boys responded almost at the same time, their voices overlapping slightly before settling into a shared rhythm. Vanessa inclined her head. Good morning. Breakfast unfolded with an ease that had not existed before. Conversation moved without force, carried by simple questions and uncomplicated answers. The boys spoke about school again, about a teacher who had asked more questions than usual, about classmates who were curious but unsure how to express it. Elijah listened carefully, offering quiet responses that did not interrupt but supported. Vanessa listened as well, but her role was different now. She was not directing the conversation. She was part of it. At one point, Jordan looked at her and asked, "Did you always have this house?" The question was innocent, but it carried layers. Vanessa considered it. "No," she said. "I built my place in it over time." Jalen tilted his head slightly. Was it hard? Vanessa met his gaze. "Yes," she answered honestly, "but not in the way I expected." Elijah glanced at her, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. Jordan accepted the answer without pressing further. To him, it was enough. After breakfast, the boys prepared for school again, their movements more relaxed than before. There was no hesitation when they included Elijah in their routine, no uncertainty about whether he belonged in these moments. He walked them to the car once more. This time, Vanessa joined them. The three stood side by side as the boys climbed in. It was not a planned arrangement, but it felt intentional nonetheless. "Have a good day," Elijah said. Jordan nodded enthusiastically. "We will." Jalon added, "We'll tell you about it later." Elijah's expression softened. "I'll be here." The car pulled away, leaving the three adults standing in a quiet line that had not existed before. Vanessa did not move immediately. Neither did Elijah. Mama Agnes watched from a distance, her presence steady, her expression unreadable but calm. "They're adjusting quickly," Vanessa said. Elijah nodded. "They don't carry as much resistance." Vanessa folded her arms lightly, not in defense but in thought. "They didn't build the walls we did," she said. Elijah looked at her. "No," he agreed. "But they would have eventually." Vanessa exhaled slowly. "Yes." The acknowledgement lingered, not as regret, but as understanding. Later that morning, Vanessa found herself in the study again. The room no longer felt exclusively hers, though its familiarity remained. Papers were arranged neatly across the desk, but she did not immediately sit down to review them. Instead, she stood by the shelves, her fingers brushing lightly along the spines of books she had once used as markers of knowledge and control. Now they felt different, less like tools, more like records. Elijah entered without knocking this time. The change was small, but it carried meaning. "I spoke with Conrad before he left," he said. Vanessa turned slightly. "And he wants to finalize the legal transitions by the end of the week." Vanessa nodded. "That's expected." Elijah stepped further into the room, his gaze moving across the space before settling on her. "There's something else," he added. Vanessa waited. "He asked if I would take an active role in the family business." Vanessa's expression remained composed, but her attention sharpened. "And what did you say?" Elijah met her gaze directly. "I told him I would consider it." Vanessa studied him for a moment. "That's a significant decision." "I know." Silence followed, but it was not uncertain. It was thoughtful. Vanessa moved toward the desk, resting her hands lightly against its surface. "If you choose to step into that role," she said, "it will change how the world sees this family." Elijah's voice remained steady. "It already has." Vanessa allowed a faint acknowledgement of that truth. "Yes," she said, "but this would define it further." Elijah took a slow breath. "I'm not interested in preserving what it was," he said, "only in shaping what it can be." Vanessa held his gaze. "That will require more than intention." "I know," he repeated. She considered him carefully, weighing not his words, but the consistency behind them. "Then you should not make the decision alone," she said. Elijah's brow shifted slightly. "You mean with you?" Vanessa nodded. "With me," she confirmed, "and with them when the time is right." Elijah accepted that without resistance. "That makes sense." The conversation did not resolve the question, but it reframed it. It was no longer about individual position. It was about shared direction. The afternoon brought an unexpected quiet. No urgent calls. No immediate disruptions. Vanessa used the time differently than she would have before. Instead of filling it with tasks designed to maintain control, she allowed space for observation. She found herself returning to the garden again. Elijah joined her later, not by coincidence, but not by arrangement either. "They seem to like this place," he said, referring to the boys. Vanessa nodded. They were not given many spaces to simply exist before. Elijah glanced at her. "And now?" Vanessa looked out across the open space. "Now they have more than one," she said. Elijah considered that. "And we're learning how to share them." Vanessa allowed a faint, thoughtful expression. "Yes." They walked slowly, not following a defined path, but not wandering aimlessly either. The garden stretched around them, quiet and open, offering a contrast to the structured environment the house had once imposed. "Elijah," Vanessa said after a while, "do you regret staying?" He looked at her, surprised by the question. "Staying close," he clarified. She nodded. "Yes." Elijah did not answer immediately. "No, he said finally. I regret why I had to. Vanessa absorbed that. That's fair. He studied her briefly. Do you regret what you chose? Vanessa did not look away. Yes, she said. But regret doesn't undo anything. No, Elijah agreed. It doesn't. They continued walking. What matters is what comes after, Vanessa added. Elijah nodded. That's the part we control. When the boys returned that evening, their energy carried a different tone. Not excitement. Not tension. Something in between. We have another project, Jordan announced as soon as he entered. Jalin followed, more measured as always. It's about planning, he said. Future goals. Elijah smiled faintly. That's a broad topic. Jordan nodded. We have to choose something we want to build. Vanessa listened closely. And what did you choose? The boys exchanged a brief glance. We didn't decide yet, Jalin said. We wanted to think about it first. Elijah looked at them. That's a good approach. Jordan turned to Vanessa. What would you choose? The question was direct but not simple. Vanessa considered it carefully. I would choose something that lasts, she said. Jalin's expression sharpened slightly. Like a business. Vanessa shook her head. Not necessarily, she replied. Something that continues, even when you're not there to manage it. Jordan frowned slightly, thinking. Like trust, he suggested. Vanessa met his gaze. Yes, she said. Like that. Elijah watched the exchange, understanding the weight behind it. Jalin nodded slowly. That's harder than it sounds. Vanessa allowed a faint, knowing expression. Yes, she said again. It is. Night settled once more, but the house no longer felt like it was closing in on itself. It expanded quietly, with each shared moment, each small shift that moved them further from what had been. Vanessa stood near the window again, but this time she did not wait for Elijah to join her. She turned before he arrived. You don't have to stand at the edge of things anymore, she said. Elijah paused, then stepped fully into the room. I'm starting to understand that, he replied. Vanessa nodded. It takes time. Elijah looked at her. For both of us. Yes, she agreed. They stood together, not perfectly aligned, but no longer separated by what had once defined them. Outside, the ground stretched into the quiet distance. Inside, something continued to take shape. Not complete. Not finished. But steady. And as the night deepened, neither of them spoke of endings, because there was still too much ahead that had yet to be understood, yet to be built, yet to be lived.